I just received this from Greenpeace saying SOS, Greenpeace under attack. Martin, will you fund the fight by rushing a gift of $25 or more right now? $1.1 million needed to fight big oil. Please respond in 10 days. Stop big oil from suing us into silence. Protect people and the planet. Keep the truth of the climate crisis clear. Dear Martin, you won't believe what big oil is up to now. A greedy industry raking in billions of dollars each year is suing the Greenpeace network. You read that right. Big oil is suing us, a non-profit, for $300 million. I guess I shouldn't be shocked at the lengths they are going to, but I am, because this is the most staggering lawsuit in our history, and it's not about damages to big oil. They're trying to silence us, they're trying to silence you, and they're doing this because they know people power works. Let me say it another way. They are weaponizing our justice system to stifle our right to speak for the well-being of people and the planet. These types of lawsuits are a common tactic from big oil's dirty playbook. They carry crushing costs intended to silence us or drain our resources. The same company already sued us in 2019, and that case was thrown out of court with a sharp warning to big oil. But big oil is up to its old tricks again, and this time they have something to prove because they hate to lose. Stop big oil. We must raise $1.1 million immediately. That's why I'm urging you to rush a gift of $15, $25, $30 or more right now. Fund the fight. Respond in 10 days. Greenpeace.org, USA, SOS. Your generosity will fund the fight and keep our critical work to expose environmental crimes and hold offenders accountable. Because we've been successful in exposing some of their worst offenses, big oil will do everything in their power to silence us and anyone against them. You see, big oil wants to divide us and tie up our resources, but they've underestimated you and our entire people-powered movement, and the truth is they've only galvanized our fight. This is a historic battle, and the real defendants are people, the planet, and even the basic tenets of democracy. That's why I'm asking and urging you to rush a generous gift today. With more intense floods, hurricanes and fires threatening people worldwide, the stakes have never been higher. The science is clear, climate action must be taken immediately, but big oil doesn't want that. They and their government allies will do whatever it takes to keep lining their stuffed pockets, and they'll attempt to stop anyone in their way. We must stop this corporate bullying for good. Will you join us and fund the fight? Together we can do this, like we've done so many times before, so please heed this urgent call. Our democracy and chance for a green, just and livable future depend on it. We won't be sued into silence. Our goal isn't just to win this lawsuit, it's to protect people and the planet and to preserve our democracy. Give right away at greenpeace.org/USA/SOS. Modern investment theory has been built on the idea of the pendulum. In his excellent book, Mastering the Market Cycle, Howard Marks explains how all investments swing along a pendulum of value. Assets move from undervalued to fairly valued to overvalued, and then swing back to where they began. When assets drop and are left for dead and nobody wants to buy them, they are at maximum undervalued and are at the peak of one side of the pendulum. Investors who recognize this will buy these assets on the cheap. As the market bottoms out and becomes less volatile and prices begin to rise, investors become more comfortable and the buying continues. As the price continues higher, the buying accelerates until prices hit euphoric levels. On the opposite end of the pendulum, at which point savvy investors begin to take profits and sell, and prices slide back toward fair value. In a normal world, the price will fluctuate over time along this pendulum of value. The business cycle refers to the expansion and contraction of credit and how that movement impacts asset prices. As credit is loosened, financial assets rise in value, and vice versa when tightened. Historically, the direction of credit is the current that moves the waves of the business cycle. These ebbs and flows typically play out over 10-year spans. Warren Buffett famously said, "Our markets work in 10-year cycles. It's a shame we only have 7-year memories." Buffett might be onto something. Over the past 50 years, 3 of the 5 decades have offered a Dow Jones boom. 2 have offered a Dow Jones bust. The 1980s witnessed a 238% increase in the markets. The 1990s garnered a whopping 309% return, and the current bull market that began in 2009 has seen stocks go higher by 280%. The other 2 decades offered a Dow Jones bust. In the 1970s, the Dow lost 1%. The 10 years from 2000 to 2010 is considered the lost decade because the Dow Jones returned negative and lost 8% of its value. Note that in the decades where the market underperforms, gold overperforms. Gold rose 16 times from 1971 to 1980, rising from $42 to $800. Gold rose nearly 8 times from 2000 to 2011, moving in price from $252 to nearly $2,000. In short, when stocks go bust, gold goes boom. Wall Street loves to promote the math that the stock market averages 7% per year and uses this to encourage staying invested all the time. What they fail to include in that revelation is that the 7% is a blended average. The boom decades average a positive 17% per year, and the bust decades average a negative 3%. When taken combined, the blended average is roughly 7%. For those ascribing to the wisdom of Warren Buffett, the odds are likely that the next decade will revert to the mean and become another lost decade. The boom and bust cycles of the last 50 years will likely continue. The next decade will return 0% for equities if the ebb and flow of the pendulum continues. Our premise, however, is that modern economic theory is broken, which means the business cycle is also broken. I believe this means less about a collapse in equities and more about a collapse in currencies. The coming great devaluation marks a turning and therefore a new direction. Only after a circle is completed can a new circle begin. Expecting the markets to return to the cyclicality of the business cycle assumes that after the flow of the last 10 years, which were fueled by manipulation of central banks forcing lower interest rates, it will be followed by an ebb in the coming decade where central banks push interest rates higher. The main premise of the Great Devaluation is that central banks are cornered and therefore will not willingly raise interest rates ever again. This will ultimately mean their end. The only way forward will be with a global monetary reset that begins a new cycle. The good news is that either way gold wins. If the business cycle continues, gold will soar. If the business cycle is dead, gold will serve as the keystone to the new system, just as it has been from the beginning. Cycles are round. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then begin anew. The weather cycle is a simple example. There are 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Then the cycle begins anew. These seasonal changes occur as the Earth's position to the Sun changes. A full turn around the Sun equals 1 year, just like an orbit around the Sun begins a new year. It's the completion of a full circle that begins a new cycle. In this same way, our lives are cyclical. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Our lives are made up of 4 stages or seasons: adolescence, young adult, mature adult, and old age. Thousands of years ago, the Etruscans called this life cycle the saeculum, meaning a long life. It's made up of 4 generations, roughly 22 years apart. The saeculum, according to the Etruscans, was not an exact or fixed amount of time. Rather, it was a period that could be divided into 4 seasons of life that represent youth, rising adulthood, midlife, and old age. The Etruscans were a civilization of ancient Italy who reigned from 900 BC to 100 BC. According to legend, the gods had allotted a certain number of saecula to every population or civilization. The Etruscans themselves were allotted 10 saecula. To the Etruscans, the notion of the saeculum was as scientific a principle as the Earth revolving around the Sun is for people today. For the people of ancient Italy, it wasn't some abstract theory. The saeculum was the truth. In the 2nd century BC, Roman historians were using the saecula to chronicle and track wars. The powerful science of the saeculum was that every 90 years or so, mankind was destined to make the same mistakes and suffer through crisis. This was because there would be no first-hand witnesses remaining to remind them about their mistakes of the past. Therefore, roughly every 90 years there would be a crisis or an event so big that it would change the collective mindset of mankind. Rather than measure time in 100-year increments like we do today, the Etruscans measured time from big event to big event, from crisis to crisis in roughly 90-year increments. Their calendars marked events, not dates, that changed the collective mindset and began a new order. The word crisis comes from the Greek word krisis, which means to decide. These crises, moments, were identified by the decisions of the people in a new direction. In this way, the Etruscans prepared and took action to change in advance. Instead of reacting after the fact to the pain of crisis, they embraced change at the end of the supercycle rather than fight against it. Strauss and Howe, in their book The Fourth Turning, make the case that all of human history can be told through this supercycle of the saeculum. Certainly much of American history can be told through this 90-year cycle. The great wars of American history eerily follow this cyclical pattern. The Revolutionary War ended in 1776 and was then followed by the Civil War, which ended in 1864, almost 90 years later. The saeculum was specifically memorialized by Lincoln's famous speech at Gettysburg, which begins 77 years ago and refers to the signing of the Declaration of Independence 87 years earlier. The speech is considered one of the greatest orations ever given. World War II, which ended in 1945, followed the Civil War by 4 generations, a saeculum after Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address. Each of these wars were major turning points in American history. Each of these wars was spawned by crises of inequality. This story goes into the shadowy corridors of power where history, ambition, and influence collide. He who pays the piper calls the tune. That's the title of the story that pulls back the curtain on the Rockefeller dynasty's transformation of modern medicine, exposing how philanthropy became a masterstroke of control. From the Flexner Report's overhaul of medical education to the creation of a pharmaceutical-driven healthcare system, this gripping tale reveals the calculated moves that shaped public health as we know it. Through dramatized storytelling and historical fact, this is a story of vision, strategy, and the cost of progress. It is a real-life depiction of how history repeats itself, but it's up to you to see the repetition. Are you ready to uncover the truths that have been hidden for generations? Part 1, Chapter 1. The Network. The words echoed through the marble corridors of the Rockefeller Institute, where the grand ambition of reshaping medical education in America had been born. It wasn't just about improving standards, it was about control over education, medicine, and ultimately society itself. This wasn't philanthropy, it was strategy. Fred Gates, a former preacher turned financial visionary, sat in a polished leather chair in John D. Rockefeller's opulent office. Rockefeller's empire wasn't just oil, it was influence. And Gates was his instrument. Fred Rockefeller began, his voice soft but commanding, "What we need is efficiency. The kind of efficiency that shapes the minds of a nation. We're not just funding education. We're investing in the future. But not just any future, our future." Gates nodded. He had a plan. The Rockefeller Foundation would pour millions into medical schools across the country, but not without conditions. The schools that accepted the money would adopt curricula steeped in pharmacology and laboratory research. Natural medicine, holistic approaches, and nutrition, those would be relegated to the dustbin of history. The Flexner Report was their opening gambit. Published in 1910, it was a scathing critique of medical education in America. Abraham Flexner, an academic with ties to the Carnegie Foundation, had written it with Rockefeller's backing. The report exposed the inadequacies of medical schools, pointing to their lack of standardization and scientific rigor, but it also set the stage for a seismic shift, one that would align medical education with the interests of the pharmaceutical industry. Flexner's recommendations were clear: close the substandard schools and fund only those that met rigorous scientific criteria. Behind closed doors, Rockefeller and his advisors ensured that rigorous scientific criteria meant a focus on pharmaceutical research. Within a decade, the number of medical schools in America had been halved, and those that survived owed their existence to Rockefeller's largesse. At Yale, Johns Hopkins, and the University of Chicago, grants poured in. But the money came with strings attached. Rockefeller's representatives sat on the boards, shaping policy and curriculum. The school's dependence on external funding made them compliant, willing to toe the line. And then there was the American Medical Association, once a fragmented group of physicians with little centralized authority. The AMA had been transformed by Rockefeller's funding. It now wielded enormous power over accreditation and licensure, enforcing standards that aligned perfectly with Rockefeller's vision. It wasn't just about medicine, it was about molding society. Rockefeller's influence extended beyond education. He supported research institutions, think tanks, and media outlets, ensuring that the narrative always served his agenda. The average citizen, unaware of the intricate web of influence, trusted their doctors and educators, never suspecting that their choices had been shaped by unseen hands. Gates knew the stakes were high. Rockefeller's rivals were watching, waiting for an opportunity to undermine him. But Gates also knew that they had a secret weapon: patience. They didn't need to force their agenda overnight. The seeds they planted in medical schools and research institutions would bear fruit for generations. By the 1920s, the transformation was complete. Medical education was now firmly in the grip of the pharmaceutical industrial complex. Doctors were trained to prescribe drugs, not to explore alternatives. Nutrition was dismissed as irrelevant, and the public, inundated with advertising and endorsements, came to see synthetic drugs as the pinnacle of modern medicine. In a quiet moment, Gates reflected on the irony. Rockefeller, the man whose father had sold dubious elixirs as Dr. William Rockefeller in the 19th century, had now legitimized the pharmaceutical industry on an unprecedented scale. The quackery of the past had been replaced with the scientific veneer of the present, but at its core, it was still about one thing: profit. As Gates left Rockefeller's office, he knew they were just getting started. The General Education Board, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the countless institutions they funded were more than philanthropic endeavors. They were levers of power, and Gates was the man pulling the strings. The Flexner Report had been the opening move. Now the real game was about to begin. Chapter 2, The Charity Prescription. Dr. William Welch, head of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, paced the room. The institute had just received another $2 million grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, ostensibly for research into infectious diseases. But Welch knew the real purpose. The money was a weapon, and he was its wielder. "We're shaping the future of medicine," Welch said to his colleague Simon Flexner. "But not everyone sees it that way. The critics keep harping on about nutrition and holistic care. They're stuck in the past." Flexner nodded. "Let them talk. They'll be irrelevant soon enough. We control the schools, the research, and the narrative. The public trusts us. That's all that matters." The AMA Journal was their primary vehicle for disseminating information. Funded in part by pharmaceutical companies, it touted the latest drugs and treatments while dismissing alternatives as quackery. The AMA's Council on Drugs, heavily influenced by Rockefeller-backed scientists, ensured that only approved products made it to market. Behind the scenes, the pharmaceutical companies were thriving. Patent laws and FDA regulations, both shaped by Rockefeller's allies, created an environment where competition was minimal and profits were astronomical. The public, convinced by advertising and endorsements, had no idea they were pawns in a larger game. One of the most controversial moves came in the 1940s when the Rockefeller Foundation funded a series of studies linking vitamins to health outcomes. At first glance, it seemed like a genuine effort to advance science, but the study's conclusions were carefully managed. They emphasized synthetic vitamins over natural sources, paving the way for pharmaceutical companies to dominate the market. Dr. Morris Fishbein, the editor of the AMA Journal, was a staunch ally. Under his leadership, the journal became a mouthpiece for the pharmaceutical industry. Fishbein's critics accused him of suppressing alternative therapies, but he dismissed them as cranks. "We're not suppressing anything," Fishbein insisted. "We're promoting science. If these so-called alternatives were effective, they'd stand up to scrutiny, but they don't." Privately, Fishbein admitted that the AMA's reliance on pharmaceutical advertising created a conflict of interest, but he saw it as a necessary evil. Without funding, the AMA couldn't maintain its influence, and without influence, the medical establishment couldn't control the narrative. As the years passed, the divide between orthodox and alternative medicine grew wider. The Rockefellers had succeeded in creating a system where dissenting voices were marginalized, if not silenced outright. Doctors who questioned the pharmaceutical model risked losing their licenses. Researchers who pursued unorthodox studies found themselves cut off from funding. Yet, despite their success, Rockefeller and his allies knew the battle was far from over. Public skepticism was a constant threat. They needed to stay ahead, to keep shaping perceptions, to ensure that their vision of medicine remained dominant. "This is only the beginning," Rockefeller had once said. "The world will remember us not for what we built, but for what we changed." And change it they did. Chapter 3. The Machinery of Influence. By the late 1930s, the Rockefeller Empire was no longer just an empire. It was the empire. Oil, education, medicine. They owned the chessboard and they were moving the pieces. But there was one frontier left to conquer: public health. The Milbank Memorial Fund was their golden ticket. On the surface, it was everything America loved: noble, altruistic, a beacon of hope in a nation still finding its way after the Great Depression. Behind closed doors, it was something else entirely, a machine designed to shape government policy and steer the future of healthcare. John Kingsbury was the man with the plan. As the fund's executive director, he didn't just play the game, he wrote the rules. Kingsbury was a true believer in his mission: preventive medicine, public health, and most importantly, federal health insurance. He wanted a system that looked like compassion, but worked like capitalism, ensuring the pharmaceutical and insurance industries stayed rich while the public thought it was all for their benefit. The public needs a story, Kingsbury said, leaning forward in a smoke-filled meeting room in New York. His piercing gaze scanned the small group of advisors around him. Not just data, not just charts, real human stories. A mother choosing between medicine for her kid and food on the table. A worker dying because he can't afford a doctor. We sell that story and we win. But Albert Milbank wasn't buying it. Milbank, the fund's president and its ultimate gatekeeper, was more than just a wealthy philanthropist. He was a businessman, a pragmatist who knew when to cut his losses. And Kingsbury, he was looking more and more like a liability. John, Milbank said one afternoon in his corner office, the Manhattan skyline a gray blur behind him, "We have a problem." Kingsbury smirked, the kind of smirk that told you he thought he'd already won. "A problem? I think we're on the verge of a breakthrough. The studies are—" Milbank cut him off with a wave of his hand. "It's not the studies, it's you. Your health insurance crusade. It's ruffling feathers in places we can't afford to ruffle." "You mean the AMA?" Kingsbury shot back, his voice rising. "Those dinosaurs are terrified of progress. We're on the right side of history, Albert, and you know it." Milbank's jaw tightened. "It's not just the AMA, it's Borden." Kingsbury blinked. "Borden? The milk company?" "Yes, the milk company," Milbank snapped. "The AMA is calling for a boycott of Borden's products because of you. Because of the fund, you're putting my other interests at risk, and that's not something I can tolerate." Kingsbury leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So this isn't about health insurance, it's about money, your money." Milbank's eyes narrowed. "It's about survival, John. The fund has always been about science, objectivity, staying above the fray. You've turned it into a soapbox for your personal agenda. That ends now." Kingsbury stirred, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're making a mistake, Albert. The public needs this. The country needs this. And the fund needs to stay alive," Milbank said coolly. "You've left us no choice. Your resignation is effective immediately." For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the city outside. Kingsbury stared at Milbank, his face a mixture of shock and fury. Finally, he grabbed his coat and stormed out without another word. Milbank sighed and sank back into his chair. This wasn't how he wanted it to end, but he knew it had to be done. The fund couldn't afford to become a target. Not now, not ever. The Rockefeller empire wasn't built on ideals. It was built on power, precision, and the ability to adapt. Kingsbury was a visionary, but visionaries had a way of burning too bright. Milbank had extinguished the flame, but the machinery of influence kept turning, as relentless and unstoppable as ever. Meanwhile, the Rockefeller Foundation's investments in medical research were yielding dividends. Laboratories funded by the foundation were making breakthroughs in antibiotics and vaccines. But these advances came with a price: the dominance of synthetic drugs over natural remedies. The pharmaceutical companies were quick to capitalize. With Rockefeller's backing, they launched marketing campaigns that positioned their products as modern miracles. Doctors trained in Rockefeller-funded schools prescribed the drugs without question. Patients, trusting their physicians, accepted the treatments as the best medicine science could offer. The machinery of influence extended to the media. Popular magazines and newspapers ran glowing stories about the wonders of modern medicine, often written by journalists with ties to Rockefeller-backed institutions. Public service announcements, sponsored by the Milbank Fund, urged citizens to trust science and follow their doctor's advice. The result was a society deeply embedded in a pharmaceutical paradigm. Alternative approaches were dismissed as outdated or unscientific. The idea that health could be achieved through diet, exercise, and natural remedies was relegated to the fringes of medical thought. But not everyone was convinced. A small but vocal group of critics began to question the system. They pointed to the growing influence of corporations in medicine, the conflicts of interest within research institutions, and the suppression of alternative therapies. "This isn't about health," one critic wrote in a letter to the editor of a prominent medical journal. "It's about profit. The Rockefellers don't care about curing disease, they care about controlling the market." The criticism didn't go unnoticed. Rockefeller's advisors recognized the need to address the growing dissent. They launched a counter-campaign funding studies that reinforced the legitimacy of mainstream medicine and discredited alternative approaches. Public relations firms were hired to manage the narrative, ensuring that the critics were portrayed as fringe elements. For every dissenting voice, there were 10 more singing the praises of Rockefeller-funded initiatives. The machinery of influence was relentless, and it showed no signs of slowing down. Chapter 4. The Council of Power. In June 1946, a closed-door meeting took place at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City called the International Health Conference. The attendees included some of the most powerful representatives from 61 nations, business magnates, university presidents, and government officials. At the head of the table sat David Rockefeller, the youngest of John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s sons and the future face of the family dynasty. "Gentlemen," David began, his voice calm but authoritative, "our influence has grown beyond even my grandfather's wildest dreams. But we cannot afford to rest on our laurels. The world is changing, and we must change with it." The meeting's agenda was ambitious. The Rockefellers were planning their next move, a global network of influence that would extend their reach far beyond America. Education and medicine had been their proving grounds. Now they aimed to shape international policy. Central to this plan was the creation of the World Health Organization. Officially, the WHO was a United Nations agency dedicated to improving global health. Unofficially, it was a vehicle for Rockefeller interests. The Rockefeller Foundation played a key role in the WHO's establishment, providing funding and technical expertise. They placed their allies in key positions, ensuring that the organization's priorities aligned with their own. Public health campaigns focused on vaccines and pharmaceuticals, often at the expense of broader issues like sanitation and nutrition. At the same time, the Rockefellers were investing heavily in international development. Through organizations like the Ford Foundation and the Carnegie Endowment, they funded projects in agriculture, education, and infrastructure. But these initiatives weren't purely altruistic. They were also designed to create new markets for American goods and services, further entrenching the Rockefeller empire. The meeting at the Waldorf Astoria concluded with a clear mandate. The Rockefellers would continue to expand their influence, but they would do so subtly, avoiding the spotlight. Their power would be felt, not seen, their legacy written in the policies and institutions they shaped. As the attendees filed out of the room, David Rockefeller lingered, deep in thought. The challenges ahead were formidable, but he was confident the machinery his family had built was unstoppable, a testament to the power of vision and determination. We're not just shaping the world, he murmured to himself, we're defining it. To be continued. Well, I hope you folks found this episode talking about the Rockefeller medicine and education very fascinating. Hope you appreciated it. And looking around the North Fork wineries around Greenport, do like and subscribe to the channel and help support my channel. Have a very happy holidays. God bless. Right now here in New York City, it's Christmas Eve. So Merry Christmas, everybody. Mexican drug cartels to be designated as foreign terrorist organizations: Sinaloa Cartel, Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Gulf Cartel, Los Zetas, Northeast Cartel, Juarez Cartel, Tijuana Cartel, Beltran Leyva Cartel, La Familia Michoacana. Johannesburg, the Mexican organized crime group, accused of fueling the United States fentanyl crisis, is now making the deadly drug in Africa, according to local and international law enforcement agencies. The Sinaloa cartel has chosen South Africa as a major operational base, they said, largely because of its strong trade links to China, which produces the chemicals used to make the synthetic opioid. At this stage, there isn't a big market for fentanyl in Africa. So much of this drug that's being made in underground labs on the continent is being smuggled into the United States, the biggest fentanyl market in the world, said Lieutenant General Godfrey Lebea, chief of the Hawks, South Africa's top police investigative unit. Drug overdoses have killed an estimated 400,000 Americans since 2021, with the majority linked to fentanyl, according to statistics compiled by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In its legal prescription form, fentanyl is a highly effective painkiller. Criminals, however, copy its chemical makeup in labs and illegally sell it as a powder, dropped onto blotter paper, put in eyedroppers and nasal sprays, or made into pills that look like legitimate prescription opioids, according to a report by the U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse. A few milligrams of fentanyl can kill, as it is 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. Lebea told the Epoch Times that South Africa drug traffickers and gangs linked to the Sinaloa cartel are testing local narcotics markets. Fentanyl has definitely entered our trafficking conveyor belts, he said. We know that because we're arresting suspects who are in possession of it, and they tell us, we want to see if South Africans get a taste for fentanyl. This is a very concerning because we've seen the scale of America's crisis and we don't want our country to go the same way. But we must be realistic and admit that it's possible that we end up with a tragedy of our own because fentanyl is much cheaper than the other drugs circulating in South Africa, like cocaine and heroin, and the Mexicans who are driving fentanyl use in America are now on our soil. In July, the Hawks raided what they later described as a drug superlab in South Africa's northern Limpopo province, seizing large quantities of methamphetamine, a small quantity of fentanyl, and about 500 pounds of chemicals used to manufacture both drugs. South African farmer Roloff Botha, 57, and three Mexican citizens, Gonzalez Jorge Partida, 51, Gutierrez Lopez, 43, and Ruben Vidal, Rodriguez, 44, are awaiting trial for alleged manufacturing, dealing, and possession of illicit drugs, as well as money laundering. We're still questioning the Mexican guys, Labella said. They're not saying much, but international partners have given us information that these men are working for the Sinaloa cartel. Lufuno Sadiki, senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Cape Town, told the Epoch Times that it's easy for Mexicans to blend in with locals because they look very similar to mixed race South Africans. It appears as if the Mexicans, mostly from the Sinaloa cartel, are linking up with the local gangs and showing them the ropes, so to speak, with regard to fentanyl, she said. In exchange, the South Africans introduced the cartel guys to trusted contacts in the criminal underground and to corrupt officials. Organized crime groups are attracted to South Africa for several reasons, according to Professor Anthony Minar, a security risk management expert at the University of Limpopo. It's the continent's wealthiest economy with a banking system that's linked internationally but is flawed, he told the Epoch Times. The country has well established drug markets of its own and a plethora of drug trafficking gangs. South Africa also offers regular flight connections to Central and South America, with its ports visited daily by vessels registered in Mexico. Then it has high volume trade traffic from China, and criminals are hiding chemicals used to make crystal meth and fentanyl in containers coming from China. South Africa also has a high level of official corruption. Professor Francois Stein, head of the Department of Criminology at the University of the Free State, told the Epoch Times that the Sinaloa cartel had probably been in South Africa for longer than we think, maybe for more than a decade. We're picking up evidence of this only now because our systems have improved over the past 5 years or so, and so has our cooperation with American law enforcement, he said. In September 2022, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers in Louisville, Kentucky, intercepted a package sent from South Africa containing enough cocaine and fentanyl to kill 220,000 people. That fentanyl must have been made in South Africa or somewhere else in Africa, Stein said. If that wasn't the case, it's still clear that South Africa is being used as a conduit to get fentanyl and other narcotics into the American market and other markets. In January 2024, police found crystal meth and fentanyl worth 37 million rands, about $1.98 million, hidden in ornaments in a cargo shed at OR Tambo International Airport in Johannesburg. The shipment was headed to New Zealand. It's really sad to know that our territory is being used to play a role in America's fentanyl pandemic, Labella said. But I'd like Americans to know we are cooperating with the relevant agencies in the United States and doing our best to prevent fentanyl manufacturing and distribution. An indictment in a U.S. court case relating to fentanyl production described it as the single deadliest drug threat ever encountered in the country. The indictment stated that fentanyl is the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 49. At one stage, an average of 97 people were dying daily in cases involving synthetic opioids such as fentanyl. According to the 2024 National Drug Threat Assessment of the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels are the main and most dangerous criminal organizations in Mexico. DEA reports in recent years have pointed to the Sinaloa cartel exporting its clandestine lab expertise into Africa. According to the assessment, the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels operate extensive global supply chains from precursor chemicals to production facilities and direct a complex web of conspirators that includes international shippers, cross-border transporters, corrupt officials, tunnel builders, shell companies, money launderers, and others. Who or what is the woke right, and is it ascendant in American conservative circles? If wokeness is a framework for viewing society through identity and grievance, are Christian nationalists woke right? What about closed border Republicans? Caroline McCarthy article published January the 6th, 2025. President Trump's decisive victory in November sparked a slew of headlines and prognostications about the death of so-called wokeness. Yet anyone who has spent time online lately has likely witnessed the term's resurrection in a surprising new guise, the woke right. The use of the label, or more accurately, the epithet woke right, has ramped up in recent weeks amidst the intra-MAGA war over H-1B visas for foreign laborers. Republicans who support the H-1B visa program, particularly those in the tech right, are slamming border restrictionist MAGA supporters as woke right. Steve Bannon weathered a barrage of woke right accusations after he attacked Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, saying there should be more African Americans and American-born Hispanics in tech, as much as 20%, before the country imports foreigners for those jobs. The woke right is actually a thing, a tech executive, Gary Tan, posted to X in response, getting more than 2,000 likes. The biggest proponent of the term woke right is author and podcaster James Lindsay, who made a name for himself opposing wokeness and cultural Marxism. Once a man of the left, he uses the term to target those on the right, who he says employ the same grievance politics and cancel culture tactics as the woke left. The woke right cling to identity politics, just like the left, says Mr. Lindsay. Only the bogeyman isn't white supremacy or systemic racism. Instead, the woke right sees Christians and white heterosexual men as victims of reverse racism, globalism, and the post-war liberal consensus. There's this kind of belief that there's a ruling class that's erected an ideology to marginalize people like them. That sounds very much like woke, Mr. Lindsay says. Same victim mentality, same identity politics. Christian nationalists, white identitarians, and anti-Semites fit in this category, but the term is also being used online to target those who want closed borders or think a distinctly American culture is worth preserving from an onslaught of third world immigration. Mr. Lindsay posted to X on Saturday a photo of a drag queen with an elementary school-age girl and the words woke left. Above it, next, an image of Adolf Hitler with a school-age boy and the words woke right. The post's tagline was, "Watch out for internet groomers." It's a term that's being pushed by people who could probably be described as classically liberal, still within the sort of right-wing framework, right-wing umbrella, but it's being used sort of as a means to attack and smear any policy positions of conservatives, populists, you name it. The president of the New York Young Republican Club, Gavin Wax, tells The Sun, "I think it's very astroturfed," he says, using a term meant to describe a fake grassroots movement. Many people on the right say the woke right label is nothing more than a rebranded insult for the disreputable fringes of the far right. A Republican congressman from Texas, Dan Crenshaw, first used the term in 2022 to insult MAGA firebrands like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who he said rail against the establishment and rhinos with no ideological substance to back it up. The label didn't catch on then. Woke right is just alt-right 2.0. It means nothing. It's just a "you're my enemy" label. Libertarian-leaning political commentator and podcaster Tim Pool posted to X. Another major proponent of the term woke right is the political commentator and podcaster Konstantin Kisin, who calls Tucker Carlson the undisputed spiritual leader of the woke right, and Candace Owens another top acolyte. Mr. Kissen says revisionist history is a signature characteristic of the woke right. who feel they are awake to the real truth about history and systems of oppression in a similar way as the woke left. If the government lied about COVID and Trump-Russia collusion, woke-right logic follows, then it must be lying about everything. One easy tell is how quickly a person labels as psyop any official government response to any news story. Just as a woke leftist sees a conspiracy against him that he calls systemic racism in every workplace, classroom, and interaction, so a woke rightist sees a conspiracy against him in every institution, media publication, and historical consensus. Importantly, disagreement and criticism only reinforces his belief in the conspiracy, Mr. Kissen says. One element that is still missing, which is why the ideology has yet to properly take shape, is that the scapegoat group behind the conspiracy is still unclear. They have experimented with globalists, Marxists, and elitists, but none of them fit the bill because they do not readily conjure an image of the suspect group in the mind of the average viewer. Mr. Kissen says, this is where the war in Israel has come in handy. Support for Israel in its war at Gaza has created a schism on the right, and now both sides of the debate are calling the other woke right. Since Miss Owens left the conservative news outlet Daily Wire in March, she spends much of her podcast talking about the Zionist media, pedophilia, uncovering histories of genocide against Christians, and a sexually deviant sect that split from Judaism called Frankism. The way I view and understand wokeness is it's like an operating system, it's a methodology. It's a framework through which you view the world, the owner of the Babylon Bee, Seth Dillon, told Bari Weiss. They're using the same framework and methodology that the left used, and they're scapegoating an entire people using these identity and grievance-based politics they supposedly reject, but because they see Christianity as being marginalized and oppressed by the Jews or the elites or the globalists, it's not necessarily the Jews. Prominent members of the Libertarian Party who supported Trump this cycle routinely post against American support for Israel. The popular libertarian podcaster Dave Smith says he thinks supporters of Israel are more woke because they see anti-Semitism everywhere, similar to the way the woke left sees racism as society's defining power structure. There's so much more of a devastating case that the woke right are the Laura Loomers and Ben Shapiro's of the world than that Tucker Carlson and Candace are woke somehow for engaging in historical revisionism, Mr. Smith said. Support for Israel and H-1B visas don't line up neatly across the right, and this poses a problem as to who exactly fits the woke right bill. As the GOP tent expands and the party gets ready to take power this month, intra-party struggles are perhaps expected. A similar jockeying for power happened when President Biden took office between progressives and centrist Democrats. Mr. Wax says Mr. Lindsay is trying to push woke right hard as a sort of rebranding or gatekeeping of the right. Mr. Lindsay made his career battling and explaining wokeness, but as mainstream America seemingly rejects it, perhaps this is a bid to stay relevant and revive his brand. It's a meaningless insult, and there's no real hard and fast definition. Reading from the headlines of the United States Senate, www.senate.gov, Kirsten's New York Minute sworn into the 119th Congress. Kirsten Gillibrand, U.S. Senator for New York. Welcome to Kirsten's New York Minute. Here's what she's been up to this week. Getting sworn into the 119th Congress. Last week, Kirsten was sworn in for her third full term in the United States Senate. Representing New York is the honor of a lifetime, and Kirsten looks forward to continuing to fight for her constituents during the 119th Congress. Number 2, honoring President Jimmy Carter. President Jimmy Carter was a devoted public servant, a lifelong activist, and a prolific humanitarian. He will be deeply missed. Kirsten paid her respects to President Carter as he lay in state in the U.S. Capitol and at his funeral on Thursday. Number 3, plans for the new Congress. Kirsten is committed to delivering on the issues important to New Yorkers as she continues her work in the 119th Congress. On Wednesday, she held a press conference outlining her legislative priorities going into the new Congress, which include lowering costs for hardworking families, creating good paying jobs, passing paid family and medical leave, securing care for our 9/11 survivors, fighting age discrimination, and mandating government transparency and accountability. Number 4 is fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment, ERA, is our best shot at protecting reproductive freedom for years to come. On Sunday, Kirsten brought her campaign for the ERA to New York City, where she urged President Biden to order the National Archivist to certify and publish the amendment before he leaves office. If published, the ERA would enshrine equality and reproductive rights in the Constitution. Number 5 is Dollars, New York. Rochester Beacon Development in a Loop North project gets a $100 million boost. Kirsten is committed to bringing federal dollars home to New York to improve critical infrastructure across the state. This week, she announced several significant federal investments that will make our state safer, greener, and more equitable. These investments include $100 million for Rochester's Inner Loop project, which will be used to reconnect disadvantaged neighborhoods to Rochester's downtown, $15 million for the installation of up to 350 electric vehicle charging stations at SUNY campuses across the state, $9.2 million for the expansion of high-speed internet access in the city of Niagara Falls, $3.9 million for the development of bicycle and walking path infrastructure in central New York. Number 6 is helping New Yorkers get their retirement benefits. When a constituent needed to secure her court-awarded retirement benefits, she contacted Kirsten's office for help. After Kirsten's team contacted the Office of Personnel Management on her behalf, the constituent was granted a retroactive payment of over $50,000. Individual casework is Kirsten's top priority. If you need help with the federal agency, contact her. Now I'm going to look at americasurveys.com. How should the U.S. address the threat of climate change? It gives a list. 1, implementing strict environmental regulations. 2, investing in renewable energy. 3, focusing on technological innovation. 4, balancing environmental goals with economic growth. 5, participating in global climate agreements. What each side of the debate says. The threat of climate change has sparked a complex debate in the United States with various opinions on how to address this pressing issue. On one side, many scientists and environmental advocates argue for urgent action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They emphasize the need for policies promoting renewable energy sources like solar and wind, as well as energy efficiency measures. Supporters of this approach often advocate for government regulations such as carbon pricing or emissions caps to incentivize businesses and individuals to reduce their carbon footprint. They believe that failing to act decisively could lead to severe consequences, including extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and threats to biodiversity. Conversely, some groups express skepticism about the severity of climate change or the effectiveness of proposed policies. These skeptics often argue that the economic costs of aggressive climate action could outweigh the benefits. They advocate for a more gradual approach, emphasizing the importance of balancing environmental concerns with economic growth. This perspective often includes support for traditional energy sources like natural gas and coal as essential for job creation and energy security. Critics of stringent climate policies often call for technological innovation rather than regulation, suggesting that market-driven solutions could ultimately lead to cleaner energy alternatives without stifling economic development. In the political arena, the debate about climate change is deeply polarized, with differing views on the role of government intervention, while some politicians push for comprehensive climate legislation, others resist, fearing potential job losses or increased energy costs. The discussion also raises questions about equity, as low-income communities often face the brunt of climate impacts, leading to calls for inclusive solutions that address social justice alongside environmental sustainability. Ultimately, how the US addresses climate change remains a contentious and multifaceted issue. Southern California is experiencing its most devastating winter fires in more than 4 decades. Fires don't usually blaze at this time of year, but specific ingredients have come together to defy the calendar in a fast and deadly manner. Start with supersized Santa Ana winds, whipping flames and embers at 100 miles an hour, much faster than normal, and cross that with the return of extreme drought. Add on weather whiplash that grew tons of plants in downpours, then record high temperatures that dried them out to make easy to burn fuel. Then there's a plunging and unusual jet stream and lots of power lines flapping in those powerful gusts. Experts say that's what is turning wildfires into a deadly urban conflagration. Speed is the killer. Tiny, mighty, and fast fires have blazed through America's West in the last couple of decades as the world warms, said University of Colorado fire scientist Jennifer Balch. She published a study in the journal Science last October that looked at 60,000 fires since 2001 and found that the fastest growing ones have more than doubled in frequency since 2001 and caused far more destruction than slower, larger blazes. Fires have gotten faster, Balch said Wednesday. The big culprit we're suspecting is a warming climate that's making it easier to burn fuels when conditions are just right. Summer fires are bigger usually, but they don't burn nearly as fast. Winter fires are much more destructive because they happen much more quickly, said U.S. Geological Survey fire scientist John Keeley. AccuWeather estimated damage from the latest fires could reach $57 billion, with the private firm's chief meteorologist Jonathan Porter saying it may become the worst wildfire in modern California history based on the number of structures burned and economic loss. Conditions are ideal. It's really just the perfect alignment of everything in the atmosphere to give you this pattern and strong wind, said Tim Brown, director of the Western Regional Climate Center. Wind speed and the speed of spreading flames are clearly linked. The impact increases exponentially as wind speed increases, said fire scientist Mike Flanagan of Thompson Rivers University in Canada. If firefighters can get to the flames within 10 minutes or so, its spread can be contained, but 15 minutes it's too late and it's gone. The horse has left the barn. There's no shore link between Santa Ana winds, gusts from the east that come down the mountains, gain speed and hit the coast, to human-caused climate change, said Daniel Swain, climate scientist for the California Institute for Water Resources. But a condition that led to those winds is a big plunge in the temperature of the jet stream, the river of air that moves weather systems across the globe, which helped bring cold air to the eastern two-thirds of the nation, said University of California Merced climate and fire scientist John Abatsoglu. My latest America Surveys question: should the government provide free mental health services to all citizens? Opinions given were 1, yes, to improve public health and reduce stigma; 2, yes, but with income-based eligibility; 3, no, it would be too costly; 4, no, focus on expanding access to existing mental health services; 5. Free services should be targeted to those most in need. What each side of the debate says. The debate over whether the US should provide free mental health services to all citizens encompasses a variety of perspectives, each with its own rationale and implications. Proponents of free mental health services argue that mental health is a critical aspect of overall health and well-being. They contend that access to mental health care should be a basic right, similar to physical health care, especially given the rising rates of mental health issues in the country. Supporters often cite evidence that untreated mental health conditions can lead to severe consequences, including increased rates of homelessness, incarceration, and substance abuse. They argue that investing in mental health services can alleviate these societal burdens and ultimately save money in healthcare costs by preventing more serious health issues. On the other hand, critics of free mental health services raise concerns about funding and resource allocation. They argue that providing free services could lead to increased government spending and may not be sustainable in the long term. Some believe that a government-run system could lead to inefficiencies and long wait times, potentially compromising the quality of care. Additionally, there are worries about the potential for overutilizing services, where individuals might seek care unnecessarily, further straining resources. Another viewpoint emphasizes the importance of personal responsibility and the belief that individuals should invest in their mental health care. Critics in this camp may argue that free services could diminish the perceived value of mental health care, leading to less commitment from patients. Ultimately, the question of whether the U.S. should provide free mental health services to all citizens is complex, with valid arguments on both sides regarding accessibility, funding, efficiency, and individual responsibility. Next, America surveys, should the U.S. develop a national artificial intelligence strategy? First one, yes, to lead in global AI development. Second, yes, but with a focus on ethical guidelines. Third, no, it's too risky and could lead to misuse. Fourth, no, focus on private sector innovation. Fifth, national AI strategy should be developed in collaboration with other countries. What each side of the debate says, the question of whether the US should develop a national artificial intelligence AI strategy is a topic of considerable debate, with various perspectives shaping the discussion. Proponents of a national AI strategy argue that a coordinated approach is essential for maintaining the US's global leadership in technology. They believe that without a clear strategy, the country risks falling behind other nations, particularly China, which is heavily investing in AI development. Supporters assert that a national strategy could help drive innovation, foster economic growth, and ensure that AI technologies are developed in ways that align with ethical standards and societal values. They emphasize the importance of establishing regulations that promote safety and privacy while encouraging research and development. On the other hand, some critics express concerns about the potential for overregulation. They argue that too much government involvement could stifle innovation and hinder the agility of private companies, which are often at the forefront of AI advancements. These critics advocate for a more laissez-faire approach, suggesting that the market should dictate the pace and direction of AI development. They believe that excessive regulation could lead to bureaucratic inefficiencies and slow down progress in a rapidly evolving field. Additionally, there are ethical considerations surrounding AI that fuel the debate. Advocates for a national strategy stress the need to address issues like bias in AI algorithms, job displacement, and the potential for misuse of AI technologies. Conversely, some stakeholders argue that these concerns can be managed without a formal national strategy, suggesting that existing frameworks and industry guidelines may be sufficient. In summary, the debate over a national AI strategy encompasses a range of opinions. with proponents emphasizing national security and ethical development, while critics warn against potential overreach and the risk of limiting innovation. Third America surveys. Should the US impose stricter regulations on multinational corporations? Yes, to ensure fair business practices and protect workers. No, focus on enforcing existing regulations more effectively. Yes, but balance with incentives for corporate responsibility. Regulations should be targeted at specific practices. No, it would hinder economic growth and innovation. What each side of the debate says. The debate on whether the US should impose stricter regulations on multinational corporations is a complex issue with compelling arguments on both sides. Proponents of stricter regulations argue that multinational corporations often wield immense power, which can lead to unethical behavior and exploitation. They contend that these companies can prioritize profit over social responsibility, negatively impacting workers, communities, and the environment. For example, critics cite instances of labor exploitation in developing countries, environmental degradation, and tax avoidance strategies that undermine local economies. Stricter regulations, they argue, would ensure that corporations adhere to ethical standards, pay fair wages, and contribute to sustainable practices. On the other hand, opponents of increased regulation argue that multinational corporations are vital to economic growth and innovation. They assert that these companies create jobs, drive technological advancements, and enhance global trade. Imposing stricter regulations, they argue, could stifle creativity and competitiveness, driving businesses to relocate to countries with more favorable conditions. Additionally, some believe that existing regulations are sufficient and that the focus should instead be on encouraging voluntary compliance and corporate social responsibility initiatives. Furthermore, there are concerns about the potential consequences of increased regulations on consumers. Critics suggest that stricter rules could lead to higher prices for goods and services, as companies may pass on the costs of compliance to consumers. This could disproportionately affect low-income individuals and families. Ultimately, the debate reflects broader questions about the balance between corporate freedom and accountability, the role of government in the economy, and the responsibilities of businesses in a globalized world. Each side presents valid points, and finding a middle ground remains a significant challenge. Next, America's survey. Should the U.S. require health warnings on processed meats similar to tobacco products? 41.9% yes to inform consumers and reduce consumption of unhealthy foods. 30% no, focus on public education about the risks of processed meats. 9.9% yes, but with flexibility for different products. 8.3% no, it would be too intrusive and unnecessary. 7.9% warnings should be encouraged but not mandated. 2% not sure. The debate over whether the US should require health warnings on processed meats similar to those on tobacco products revolves around public health, personal choice, and regulatory responsibilities. Proponents of health warnings argue that processed meats, such as bacon, sausages, and deli meats, have been linked to various health issues, including heart disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. Studies, including those from the World Health Organization, suggest that regular consumption of these products increases health risks. Supporters believe that health warnings could inform consumers, helping them make better dietary choices and potentially reducing healthcare costs associated with diet-related illnesses. They argue that just as society recognizes the dangers of tobacco, it should also acknowledge the risks associated with processed meats. On the other hand, opponents of such regulations often emphasize personal freedom and choice. They argue that individuals should have the right to make their own dietary decisions without government interference. Some critics question the scientific consensus on processed meats, claiming that the evidence linking them to health issues is not definitive enough to warrant such warnings. Additionally, they contend that such measures could unfairly target specific food industries and harm farmers and producers, potentially leading to economic consequences. Furthermore, some believe that rather than imposing warnings, education about balanced diets and healthy eating habits would be a more effective strategy. This perspective emphasizes promoting a variety of food choices rather than singling out processed meats for negative attention. In summary, the discussion about health warnings on processed meats highlights a complex interplay between public health interests and personal liberties, with valid arguments on both sides of the debate. Now reading from inequality.org, Chuck Collins and Chris Mills Rodrigo. This week, two of the catastrophic fires that have torn across Los Angeles remain out of control as of this Wednesday morning. The Eaton and Palisades fires, the most destructive in Southern California history, have now claimed at least 25 lives and destroyed entire communities. Our thoughts are with our readers in the area. The California fires, like all disasters, have exposed our society's stark inequalities. The damage has not discriminated between rich and poor neighborhoods, but those rich neighborhoods have the means to rebuild. Those poor now face the prospect of post-destruction gentrification. The celebration of first responders, meanwhile, has overlooked how California continues to abuse prison labor. Over 1,000 incarcerated people have been fighting the deadly flames. They risk serious injury for less than $15 a day. At the same time, the fires have shown the power of community. Donations are flooding into families who've lost their homes, and robust mutual aid networks are helping those affected stay afloat. The task ahead to ensure that this ethos of communal care stays central once the fires flicker out and the rebuilding begins. Inequality by the numbers. Less than $1 per day, the savings the bottom 50% of U.S. families would get if Congress extends the 2017 Trump GOP tax law. The richest 0.1% of families would pocket an estimated $314,266 per year in tax savings from this extension. Faces on the front lines. From Washington State, a roadmap for defending progressive taxes. This week's frontline faces Eli Taylor Goss, the executive director of the Washington State Budget and Policy Center, a research and policy organization that works to advance economic justice, and Treasure Mackley, the executive director of Invest in Washington Now, an organization working to build support for progressive revenue and remake the state's tax code so it works for everyone. What they've done to help create a more equal world. This past November, Taylor Goss and Mackley played pivotal roles in the successful campaign to defend Washington State's still new capital gains tax on the ultra-wealthy. The two focused their efforts on explaining how tax revenues directly facilitate popular initiatives in areas ranging from childcare and education to parks and safety net protections. They exposed just how much tax codes in Washington State have historically favored the wealthy and shifted public opinion enough to defeat a repeal of the state's capital gains tax, winning 64% of the vote. What makes equality so important to them? Our win, which many thought impossible a decade ago, was a bright spot nationally this fall. Taylor Goss and Mackley note, we still have a long way to go towards a just tax code, but we hope you take heart that it's possible to flip the script and build public support for progressive revenue. We hope your state is next in making that happen.